Welcome to the Hollywood in Toto podcast, the right take on entertainment. The HiT cast offers a weekly look at Hollywood from a conservative point of view. Sick of media bias infecting Hollywood headlines? Tired of stars insulting your views? HiT has your back. Now, here's your host, Christian Toto.
Welcome to episode 30 of the Hollywood in Toto podcast. This week we're talking with Brad Thor, the New York Times bestselling author behind Code of Conduct, Act of War, and the new novel Use of Force. My chat with Brad got me thinking. He mentioned Andrew Breitbart, who I worked under briefly at Breitbart News before his shocking death in 2012. Andrew's death is a loss that can't be measured. He meant so much to honest conservative media. His voice is dearly missed, particularly in our current times. His spirit lives on, though, that happy warrior mentality. Andrew was the kind of guy who would retweet the nastiest comments made at him. He did it all the time. I think it was just part of his sense of humor, but also I think it was part of his transparency. He wanted those people's voices to be heard, too. More voices, not less. That was part of his mantra. And you know what? I think it's something that conservatives shouldn't forget as the conversation gets meaner. There's a fresh debate on the right now about the best way to fight the culture wars. Brad opened up to me about the recent interruptions of those Trump-like Julius Caesar shows going on in New York. You'll hear that in a moment. What would Andrew do? Well, I can't say. I didn't know him that well. I only met him a couple times. And even people who worked with him day in and day out, well, I don't think they can truly say as well. Andrew was Andrew. And to kind of assume that we know his voice, his exact opinion on things, is wrong. But I do know that Andrew wouldn't like the fact that conservatives are attacking each other on some of these critical issues. I think that's pretty safe to say. I remember Andrew working with different conservative media outlets at a time where maybe he should have kind of consolidated under just the Breitbart News banner, but he worked with different elements. He kind of tag teamed in certain stories. It helped spread them far and wide. I think it was pretty smart, but I think it was more about just being judicious with spreading the stories. I think it was more about working together, and that even though that conservatives had some differences, we're all mostly on the same page, and we're all in this fight together. And no matter where you stand on pop culture issues today, I want us to stay positive and not to shrink from opposing views. I see a lot of nasty back and forths lately about these topics, about Johnny Depp and all the crazy things he said in the last few days, about that Julius Caesar play, and about the people who are interrupting it and saying it's an attack on Trump directly. Well, let's have those conversations. Let's also talk about the fact that, hey, being civil hasn't always worked. What's the next step? Brad had some pretty specific thoughts on it. I'm still kind of formulating it, frankly. I'm still thinking about it. It's not the same old game plan. Things are changing, but let's keep that happy warrior mentality alive and well. I think Andrew would like it that way. Now, do we want to sink to the left's game when it comes to boycotts? Is that the path we're going to take? I don't know. Johnny Depp, should we stop seeing his movies? I mean, besides the fact that they're often terrible and they're getting worse? Maybe. Again, let's have that conversation. But let's do it in a really civil way, because that's what matters most. Another thing that Brad mentioned during conversation is we shouldn't get too snarky when it comes to sort of the online wars that we're fighting now. And I have to say, it kind of hit close to home. I've always kind of carried myself in a more positive way when it comes to HollywoodInToto.com. I don't attack people. I don't do name calling. I don't sort of make fun of people for things they can't control. I try to just stick to the facts, make a good argument, and hopefully change a heart or mind or two. But you know what? Lately, I kind of feel like I'm getting snarkier. I think some of the anger that I'm feeling personally towards some of the stuff that's going on in our culture is starting to seep into my work. So I'm glad he mentioned that. He wasn't calling me out directly. He wasn't mentioning anything I've written recently. But, sometimes when something hits home, there's a reason for it. If it kind of hits a nerve, you should not just kind of strike back or deny it. Think about it. So something I've been working on the last few days, hey, I need to be a little bit more positive, bring out that Andrew Breitbart spirit within me, and I think it'd be all the better for it, frankly.
I am Groot, and you are listening to my daddy's podcast.
Thanks, Ben. This week's HiT tip of the week is arbitrage. Richard Gere is having a really great run of late, despite the fact that the major studios won't put him in movies. Turns out that his anti-China comments have really caused a rift in the industry. And so those studios who love to sell movies into the Chinese marketplace, well, they're not too keen on having him. But you know what? He's having some pretty good revenge by starring in some high-quality independent films, like Arbitrage. The 2012 film casts him as a Wall Street guy, struggling to cover up some of his infidelities and also his fraudulent ways. There's a car crash, someone dies, and things get even nastier for him and his future. Really sturdy cast here, including Nate Parker and Susan Sarandon, and Gere again is terrific, in a quiet but powerful performance. So I really recommend this one. It didn't get a lot of attention like a lot of films these days. It just kind of slipped on by, got some good reviews, and snuck onto home video. But you know what? It's on Amazon Prime right now. So check out Arbitrage, and if you like it, let me know. Send me a tweet at HollywoodInToto. And by the way, please check out the latest stories at HollywoodInToto.com. There's a really fun piece by contributor Matt Morava about TV's top screen duos. Not just the couples, but also sort of the tag team duos. Think Gilligan's Island with the Skipper and Gilligan, which did not make the list, but I think it could have. Duos that have really great chemistry. Chemistry is so elusive, but it's so powerful and so amazing when it happens in just the right doses. And I think this article really kind of captures that flavor. I think you'll like it.
Nobody puts baby in a corner.
You will believe a man can fly.
That's right. I'm getting too old for this.
Get to the chopper if you feel lucky, punks.
Buzz, your girlfriend. Woof.
Yo, Adrian.
Hey, we're covering all these franchises and more over here on iTunes at the Franchise Podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Ehrenberg.
And I'm your host, Henry Papali, and check us out, folks.
What's your favorite scary movie? Probably being covered. All right. Take the red pill.
Now let's get to our interview with Brad Thor. He's one of the most successful authors around, a man synonymous with page-turning thrillers. His latest book, Use of Force, serves up more white-knuckle tension in a tale that once again feels a little bit too close to reality. Brad always does his homework, so those details ring true, and you can feel it on every page. You can find Use of Force by following the Amazon link at HollywoodInToto.com/Brad-Thor. That's where all the show notes are, as always. You know, Brad isn't just a great author. He's also a smart, dedicated conservative fighting for more freedom and less government intervention. I like him for that, and I like him for all of his work. Here's my interview with Brad Thor. Well, thank you, Brad, for joining the Hollywood in Total podcast. You know, I read that you started your writing career in your 30s, and I was kind of curious, looking back, do you think that actually maybe having a 30-something's maturity and life experience helped you along that way, or you know, what kind of role did that play in your early days as a writer?
You know, it's a great question. I had spent much of my young adulthood actually running away from what I wanted to do, which was to be an author. I was afraid what would happen if I took the time to write a book and nobody liked it, it didn't get published. I had that terrible voice in the back of my head that I think all of us have to greater or lesser degree that says, you know what, maybe you just don't want to risk the embarrassment. Don't, you know, it's no big deal. Just don't do it because the downside could be terrible. And it was actually being on my honeymoon and my wife looking at me and saying, you know, I never asked you this, but what would you regret on your deathbed never having done? And I said, writing a book and getting it published. That changed everything. Because my wife said, when we get home from the honeymoon, you need to start taking 2 hours a day at least of protected time, no phone, no fax, no email, and make that dream come true. And that's what made all the difference. So I don't know where I'd be if I had started earlier. I just know that I was the reason that I didn't start earlier. It was my fault.
Yeah. Well, obviously things worked out well, so can't be kicking yourself too hard. Now, one of the things that makes your work so impressive, and I think that fans really relate to, or at least appreciate, is that the realism of your stories. And I know you tap into kind of a lot of different networks of officers and agents to get that real, authentic feel. I'm thinking, when you first started writing, you didn't have that network. You didn't have the sort of those people to fall on. How did you get them to trust you? Because I'm going to guess that they wouldn't automatically spill their secrets to just about anyone. I mean, they want to make sure you're doing the right thing in a sense.
Yeah, it was straight up networking. I had a very, very cool next door neighbor in college who had come out of a very interesting Army unit at Fort Bragg. They were based in the 80s in Berlin, and their job was that if the Russians ever overran the wall, they were to launch guerrilla activities. And he was a really cool guy. Everybody liked him. He had great contacts. I parlayed that into more contacts, bought a lot of steak dinners, a lot of pitchers of beer. But the big thing is to let these folks know that, I got them and that I would always be good to their brand. I wouldn't do anything or put anything in the books to embarrass them or that they didn't want in there. So building that level of trust was a big deal. And I've continued to build it over many, many years and develop some great friendships with some absolutely incredible American patriots.
Do you find that over time that they kind of reveal more as you got to know them, as they trust you, as the network kind of expanded, where maybe those details might not have been reachable maybe in the first kind of book or two?
Yeah, well, you know what? To a person, no one has ever revealed anything to me that they weren't supposed to reveal.
I know.
So they were fantastic. But what's funny is that if you're around people long enough, I've had this happen more than once where they've said, okay, Thor, we told you A, we hinted at C, and we can't believe it. You figured out B all on your own, and B cannot be in the book. B absolutely. We're not saying B's real. We're just saying take that out of the book. Don't publish that. And I obey. I do that. I mean, that isn't even a question. I would never want to put Americans at risk or our national security, and I don't want to poison that well. I want to be able to go back to these incredible people again. And it only takes one screw up to get PNG'd, as they say, to become persona non grata, and you're on the outside looking in, and I just respect them too much to ever say this plot point or this cool little thing is more valuable than those relationships.
Yeah. Now, I'm reading Use of Force, and one of the things that pops out is, gosh, this sounds like the headlines. This kind of scares me. We've just heard something similar. It evokes all these things, and that's one of the reasons why your book sells so well. When it comes to kind of keeping, I guess, kind of tabs on the zeitgeist and getting a feel for what could be, does that take time to develop, or is it talking to those sources that helps make that energy part of your stories?
It's a mixture of all those things. So I call what I do faction, where you don't know where the facts end and the fiction begins, and I try to make them as real as possible. But by the same token, these are thrillers. These are white-knuckle thrill rides. You're supposed to be on the edge of your seat, flipping those pages faster and faster. So there is art and there is reality that come together in my thrillers. I'm not writing an instruction manual. So it's, as much as I enjoyed Clancy over the years, I used to get bogged down with Clancy's detail. And Elmore Leonard was famous for saying the best piece of advice he could give young writers is leave out the parts that people skip. So do I need 15 pages for how the guidance system on a Tomahawk missile works? No. I just need to know that, this is how they identified the bad guys, and they sent the missile, and it did the work. So it is a balance. It's I'm seeing a lot of men come out of the special operations community, out of the military, and try their hand at thrillers. And some of them are really, really good. Some of them are great authors. And then there's some that just, they've been there, they've served this country honorably, and they've really seen some pretty serious stuff. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it'll translate into book form. Everybody thinks they can be a writer, but there is a certain thing. It's more than just words on a paper to tell a story. I have a lot of people come to me and say, hey, can you help out? Particularly with our vets, I look to help people. I look to help them as much as possible.
Gotcha. One of the key parts of your new book, which is a recurring theme, obviously, is our hands are tied. We want to fight terrorism, but we have to go A to B to C to D. Whereas obviously the heroes in this book don't do that, and it's one of the things that makes it so much fun. Do you get the sense in all the work that you do, both writing fiction and talking to the people you do, that this is getting worse, or is it getting better? Are we making improvements where to get things done we have to kind of skip certain rules, or we have to kind of negotiate better, but often we don't? What's your sense just overall, sort of from a real-world perspective?
Well, I think that we still have problems. I mean, listen, one of the greatest things about our nation is that we are a nation of laws, not of men. Laws are very important. I mean, the word republic comes from Latin, res publique, the public thing, which is the law. We have specific monies allocated for specific things to the Defense Department. We have Title 10 issues, Title 50 issues, not to get too far into the weeds. But what you'll find is that if money was used for a certain program under a certain kind of bucket of money, and we develop intelligence on bad guys and where they are under Title 10, you can't use it for Title 50 actions. I've encountered really weird stuff where you would think the natural thing is we found the bad guys, let's go whack them. But because of the way the intelligence was developed, there's all these stumbling blocks. And, we're dealing, particularly when it comes to Islamic terrorism, with a group that doesn't obey any rules whatsoever. And they are taking advantage of our open Western democracies to target us, and not to target cops and soldiers in particular, but to target civilians, whether it's at the Ariana Grande concert or other places. So this idea that we're going to always adhere to the rules, that's something I think we are proud of, that we were not barbarians. But by the same token, how do you fight against, how do you adhere to a certain amount of rules when your enemy doesn't follow any, and they'll do anything they can to win? So I think it's something we as a nation need to constantly be talking about, how and what we're willing to do to keep our children and the future generations and ourselves safe.
Yeah, and it makes for great fiction, obviously, but the real world implications are huge. You think about the last few months, and I feel like there's just been a terror attack after terror attack. I mean, it's been awful. And I wonder, just given the work that you do, when things happen with this breaking news, does that ever impact your writing flow? I mean, can you, reshuffle a scene and maybe add elements or just little bits from what's happening, or are you kind of locked in, and maybe that'll be the kind of fodder for the next time?
Well, it's interesting. Probably one of the most, the quickest examples that come to mind is that my very first book came out not too far after 9/11. And in The Lines of Lucerne, my first book, I had counterterrorism operatives discussing the worst attacks that had been conducted by terrorists. We had to go and literally stop the presses and change it and include 9/11, because you couldn't publish a book after 9/11 and not include that in the list of bad attacks. So still to this day, to the best of my knowledge, I was the first thriller writer to ever mention 9/11 in a thriller. And it just was the very unfortunate luck of the draw with the timing of that.
Gotcha. I read an interview with you, you talked about conservatives, and you said, our side has the better ideas, but it needs better storytellers. And I thought about that, obviously you're entrenched in your field, but the barriers to entry have been shrinking. I mean, technology is better. Self-publishing is a great brand new world. You can make a pretty solid looking documentary with not a lot of cash. Given that, why aren't we seeing more conservative artists kind of really impacting the culture the way you have?
Well, that whole concept really was driven home to me by Andrew Breitbart when Andrew said that politics is downstream of culture, and that we shouldn't be encouraging our talented and brilliant sons and daughters to go into think tanks in D.C. While I love people at the American Enterprise Institute and Heritage and Cato and on and on and on, I'd rather see them in media companies and going out to Hollywood, because I really do believe we need more people, not just kind of alternative guerrilla people, whether it's self-publishing or producing their own documentaries on the cheap. I'd actually like to see them in the studio system and at ABC. And, there's conservatives at CNN. They exist. I mean, those worlds of Hollywood and media largely self-select for people who are left of center, but they're capitalists too. They're looking for talented, aggressive people. And I think of Patrick Millsaps, who's out there working in Hollywood, who used to work for Newt Gingrich. And he's famous for saying, listen, I meet and have lunch and go to cocktail parties with these people every single day, and they're capitalists. They're looking to make a buck. So the more people we can put, bottom line, we can't complain that we're underrepresented in those areas if we're not sending people out into those areas. It's silly to complain that we don't have a voice out there, because we do have great ideas. And listen, at the end of the day, our republic was set up to protect the greatest minority in history, and that's the individual. And And that's the stance I come from. I think that we have ideas that the left should enjoy and want to embrace. And the better our storytelling can be, the more people we're encouraging to get into those professional streams. It's great to have guerrilla people. Great to have them. But we need them working at Warner Brothers and Universal and ABC.
You're listening to the Hollywood in Toto podcast, the right take on entertainment.
You know, I was reading a little bit about you just to prepare for this interview, and one of the things I expected to find, which I didn't, maybe I didn't look hard enough, was basically mainstream accounts of you kind of sniping at you. Obviously, you're an out conservative. No one is hiding that. And I feel like sometimes with other people in your shoes, the press can be a little snippy. They can kind of twist the narrative a little bit. And I didn't quite find that with you. I was kind of curious, is there something about your approach you think that maybe lets sort of, the entertainment weeklies of the world treat you with the respect you deserve, or is there something else in play? Because I just thought I'd find more negative stuff about you just from the ideological perspective, and I didn't see it.
Well, I'm probably pretty fortunate. I remember when Andrew got his blog sites going, Big Hollywood and all that kind of stuff, and it was my introduction to blogging, and I thought that the key was being snarky. And if there was one thing I could do, hop in a time machine and change, it would be my tone during that time where I was writing stuff there. Although I believed in the things I was writing, I could have written them with a lot more courtesy and respect. Mm-hmm. That's the big thing for me. Liberty is my litmus test. So now I have 2 children. I am more plugged in and involved in politics than I've ever been before. I'd never open a hamburger joint and hang a sign on the front that says no blacks, no Jews, and no gays. I want what I'm creating to be accessible to everyone. And I've also found that if you're polite to people, you often get that back. If you're kind to people, and it's really hard for people to talk poorly about you if they've met you and you're a good person to them. I mean, at the end of the day, we have more that unites us than divides us. And I know that sounds so trite, but it's true. And as I'm looking forward in the United States, what I'm hoping to do is to advance the cause of freedom and liberty, not necessarily republicanism. I'm largely conservative, but I've got a libertarian streak that rolls through me. I just want to be left alone, and I want my responsibilities to be to my family, my neighborhood, my community, and have that make everything good going forward. I don't want to come in from the top down from D.C.
Gotcha. One of the things I feel compelled to ask this, just given the work that you do and what's going on in the news right now, what are your thoughts on the Julius Caesar production, and more specifically, the interruptions by some right-of-center folks? They're kind of saying it's a fight fire with fire situation, and other people saying that conservatives just can't act that way. It's against our principles. Have you given it a lot of thought, and where do you stand on this?
Well, yeah, I actually just today, when you and I are doing this interview, last night I had a tweet go viral about this very thing, which is, first of all, the people who interrupted that are not conservatives. This idea that somehow the alt-right are conservatives, they are not. They are very far from being conservatives. And if you're going to adopt the tactics of the people who you so vehemently oppose, how much better are you than them? I wouldn't cross the street to disrupt a rally for Bernie Sanders. I believe in free speech, and I think I don't like the black brunch thing where people come into a restaurant and interrupt people eating breakfast on a Sunday. And I don't like people paid. This is capitalism. You're interfering with people paid for tickets to go see a play. And by the way, where was all your outrage when President Obama was depicted in the same play in Minnesota? So and I know there was the rodeo clown that wore the Obama mask from the dime store, and they basically rode that guy out of town on a rail. We're in such a poisonous time right now where everybody's got to be destroyed and torn down and never allowed to work again, and let's disrupt this. But we don't do boycotts on our side as conservatives. It's always been, I may disagree with you, but I will fight to the death for your right to say what you want to say. So to disrupt a play that's had whatever the Julius Caesar play, whatever the current president is, they've done it as Bush, they've done it as Obama, and now it's Trump. So I just think that thing is ridiculous, but I think the entire alt-right movement isn't worth the amount of ink that gets spilled over them. I really don't like them and what they stand for.
I understand and I agree with every syllable you said. Just a quick follow-up. John Nolte, who I used to work with at Big Hollywood, said he agrees with that sentiment completely, but it's not. His advice is it's not working. We're not making sort of a cultural change by kind of taking the high road. Do you any thought on that? Is that a fair reaction, and that sort of it's time for Plan B? Because, like I said, I agree with you, but there are some people who I respect on the right who say, you know what, we've tried that, and it's not working. I'm just going to get your thoughts on that.
It's interesting to get that thought from you, from Nolte, because you must be one of the 3% on Twitter that Nolte hasn't blocked.
We go
Nolte
way back. We're pals.
Everyone who challenges him, and he blocked me a while ago, and I used to be friends with him, and I think Nolte's entirely too sensitive on Twitter, particularly when there's people on his side that he should be allied with, and I like him a lot. I think he's a great writer, and I really liked him as a friend, and it broke my heart when he blocked me because we disagreed with something, but, that's his right to do if he wants to. But listen, I don't think we need, if our ideas are superior, why do we need to stoop to the tactics of the left? John and Kurt Schlichter is another buddy of mine, and Kurt is very much in that camp that we should be using their means against them, their tools against them. I wouldn't want my kids doing this stuff, so I certainly don't want to do it. I think there's a better, I don't think it's that adult to block traffic and to shout people down and prevent people from speaking and all that kind of stuff. I don't think we can take the civil out of civilization and claim to be its champions. Civil discourse requires civility, and that stuff, Christian, people can disagree with me, but I just think there's a better way to handle this. And again, I think if we had better storytellers on our side, we're not going to win over people in the middle by being chuckleheads. By doing the things that we abhor from the left, we're not going to win over the people we need to win elections. And we need to do that through sane, rational discourse. That's why I admire Ben Shapiro. He goes to college campuses and he takes all comers. He'll stay all night arguing and debating back and forth. That's the kind of stuff we need more of, not jumping on stage and ruin somebody's play. That's not the key.
Oh, it's a good follow-up. I'm glad I asked it. I'm glad you have such a thoughtful answer. Before I let you go, Brad, I want to talk just real briefly about the movie projects you're working with. I know the Athena project, I saw Ronda Rousey attached, and also your first book is going to be possibly made into a movie. Can you give an update? I know these things take time. It's Hollywood. It takes forever, and there's a lot of moving parts. But what can you share with our listeners about these films or maybe even other projects you're working on?
Well, we're really excited because you go through rewrite after rewrite after rewrite. We actually last year brought on board two of the biggest action movie writers in Hollywood. They had a huge hit last year, and once the screenplay was done, we attached a major action movie director. If I ran through the guy's credits, if I said his name, you'd know who he was right away. So now we're in the process of shopping that one. That's based on my first book, The Lions of Lucerne. And then Warner Brothers, the last discussion we had with Warner Brothers, they were looking at two different directors possibly. One is the Wonder Woman director, and then the other was Catherine Bigelow. That was kind of on their wish list potentially to direct the Athena project with Ronda Rousey. And the screenplay, I don't know that they've announced who rewrote that screenplay. This writer did such a fantastic job. I couldn't believe he took it to a whole new level. But they just had a management change, and everything's getting reviewed at Warner Brothers. This is always the trouble that you run into, whether you're an author with a movie or just a straight-up movie producer or screenwriter, is that when there's a changing of the guard, they come through swinging the sword and cutting down the old pet projects and deciding which ones live or die. So we're kind of sitting in the Coliseum waiting to see if Caesar gives us the thumbs up or the thumbs down on the Athena project. But the Lions of Lucerne stuff is very, very good, and we are very close to making a big announcement. I said that last year, and it's taken this long, and I was hoping it to be done by book tour this year because all my fans are going to ask. But we're closer than we've ever been, and we've got such a great project. I have very high hopes for it.
Well, it's good news, and often when things take time, it means that they took time for a reason, that all sort of the things are going to get in the right place. So we'll look forward to that.
And by the way, my joke with my guys in Hollywood is nobody ever said, gosh, I wish we'd spent less time in development. I wish we'd spent less time putting together a great project. So I agree with you.
Well, before we let you go, what are you watching these days? What are you reading? What's on your bookshelf? Anything, maybe some new CDs you're checking out or something digital? Always like to check in with Hollywood in Total podcast guests to find out what they're enjoying. Maybe they've got some kind of fun recommendations.
Well, I'll tell you, one of the big influences is I sat down to write this new book, and I was trying to decide why I loved Ray Donovan so much. Besides the fact that I love John Voight, and John Voight is a reader of my books, and John Voight is the reason that I got so enthralled with Ray Donovan. The fact that Ray Donovan, so many things go sideways, and just when they think they've got it right, it goes wrong. That kind of challenge for the main characters was a challenge I put on myself with writing Use of Force. So Ray Donovan, and that's going to be coming back in August, the new season I'm really excited about. I just binged The Fall on Netflix with Gillian Anderson, which was so good. And I know I'm a little bit behind on that, but I've got kids and I've been busy writing. I'm catching up. But The Fall and Lillehammer is fantastic with Stevie Van Zandt from The Sopranos, that's such a funny one. And then the newest book that I'm reading, and I'm getting caught up, is Tools of Titans by Tim Ferriss. And then the other one is by Ryan Holiday, The Obstacle is the Way, which is basically based on Stoic philosophy. So a couple of really neat, good, get your head straight, get your life straight. I'm always looking for how do I improve, how do I get better, how do I challenge myself to be more. And Tools of Titans and The Obstacle is the Way are two of my favorite books I'm reading right now.
Excellent. Well, Brad, you didn't disappoint with your picks. Again, thank you so much. The new book is Use of Force by Brad Thor, another bestseller en route. So thank you so much for sharing your time. We will have all information about you, your books, where you can find the newest one at the show notes page at hollywoodandtoto.com. Brad, it's a real treat, and keep up the great work.
You too, Christian. Stay in the fight. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks again for listening. Don't forget to check out hollywoodandtoto.com for both the show notes and, of course, the latest entertainment news. Please follow me at Twitter at hollywoodandtoto. And we'd love it if you leave a podcast review over at iTunes. See you next week.